All right, everybody. It's time once again for your favorite podcast. It's The Score, Minnesota Opera's deep dive into classical music, opera, pop culture as seen through the lens of three black folks. I am your black host, Rocky Jones, the EDI director here at Minnesota Opera. As always, I am here with my two wonderful, talented co-hosts. First up, the VP of Impact, the incredibly talented and smart Mr. Lee Bynum. Hello, Lee.
Howdy.
How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. How are you?
I'm okay. Just had quite a... Oh, what is that?
It's the fox hunt.
Charge. And speaking of Foxy, see what I did there? It's our Access and Civic Engagement Manager, Paige Reynolds. Hi, how's it going?
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Y'all, it's a big day for a number of reasons, but it's our first birthday.
Yay.
Can you believe it? We're 1 year old.
We're a toddler. We're crawling at this point, right? We're
crawling and hopefully saying dada or mama or something like that. But that's so wild that we've been doing this for a year. I'm so proud of us. I'm so proud of me and my ADHD that I was able to. But it's just so cool. I'm just so happy that we get to do this. And for our first anniversary, we've got all sorts of things going on. Later on in the show, we will have an interview with Nina Yoshida Nelsen, who is one of the co-founders of the Asian Opera Alliance and an amazing singer. But right here at the top of the show, we might as well get into it. We have the man who signs all the checks. No, I'm just playing. Our boss, our friend, the incredible president and general director of Minnesota Opera. Finally, after a year, we were able to wrangle him onto the pod. Mr. Ryan Taylor, welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hello. Happy anniversary, folks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we're so happy to have you on the show today, especially because the landmark 60th season of, of Minnesota Opera was just announced. The shows that are going to be on our main stages next year, which is super exciting. And so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk to the people about this season and why perhaps they should subscribe, what's going to be on it, what are you super excited about next season?
I mean, this is going to sound really simple, but the fact that you said main stages, that bit's cool, because I trained here in the resident program, and I adore the work that we do at the Ordway and the way that space has changed over time and continues to change. It's a great space to sing in as an artist, and it's somewhere that I have a really soft spot for the Ordway, and having the new center right next door to us in the North Loop gives us an opportunity to do a different kind of creative exploration. And I think that's being able to balance both of those is exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're starting off with Edward Tulane, right?
Edward Tulane, which was, maybe one of, on one hand, my least favorite memories of being an opera administrator was canceling Edward Tulane in March of 2020. Brilliant new piece by Paola Prestini and Mark Campbell, and just a delicious cast of artists, and because it's really a story about imagination and childhood, and I have felt strongly that we need more of those stories right now, but to just try and touch base with our inner kid, so starting with Edward Tulane and being able to bring that to the stage at the Ordway as we originally intended is going to be pretty exciting.
It is, because I mean, I remember that so well, that the week of, March 13th, 2020, a day that will live in infamy. But like that week just leading up to it. And I remember leaving the office on March 12th and turning to Eric and saying, I'm going to bring my laptop and my hard drive home just in case.
Yeah.
And here we are, 2 years later. And what sticks in my memory is Edward Tulane and going down into BMS and like seeing all the sets and going upstairs and seeing all the costumes. And then like just that feeling of like, oh my God, like what's going to happen? And just having all the trappings of Edward Tulane around us. So now to be able to like turn what was like sort of a traumatic memory, and I can only imagine if it was traumatic for me, like for all of the artists who were involved, I can only imagine. But being able to turn that around into something, joyous and happy to, open up this momentous season is just.
I feel like we just need it. There was a moment, because it was a couple months till I returned to the office for the first time under cloak and dagger and mask and everything else during the pandemic. And my first time back in, I took the back staircase, which is something not many people do, but there were still like rabbit footprints on the floor, and like cartoons of rabbits and bunnies on doorways and sticky notes with people's hand drawings of rabbits, like all the way through the building. And it just crushed me on that first visit to go back in and see all that. So the opportunity that we have now to sort of heal a little bit of that, I think is tremendous.
Yeah,
and
I
then we
do
get to
remember.
move over into our new space, the Luminary Arts Center, and start to produce in a brand new way for Minnesota Opera with Ronaldo. So it's so different, and so many things I know are coming at all of us in our various roles about what do we want to make of this space, because it's brand new, and you kind of don't want to miss that moment of like capturing whatever it is that it could be, and also knowing you're not going to hit it right with everything you do right out of the park whenever you do anything new. So it's a learning experience, and one that I think I'm interested to see how we meet that moment.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit, maybe we can jump into where the opera has been before this point, because I mean, I know with the opening of the Arts Center, and with even before that, our charter informing so much of the anti-racism and anti-oppression work. Can you just talk about a little bit about like where the Minnesota Opera has been, and like what are we reflecting on with the 60th anniversary? Yeah,
I had an opportunity this past weekend to talk to the board of another opera. They were doing a board retreat, and it was me and three of my general director colleagues, and we'd been invited by the general director of that company. And the board had some questions for us about, in each of your institutions, how are you driving your EDIA work, your access, your equity, and my colleagues looked at me and said, well, Minnesota Opera's been doing it the longest of the four of us that are in this room, so they should go first. And I said, well, we've literally been going first, and it's both one of those things that we're happy that we were first, and also like, why were we not doing this before? And so I think it's helpful to think about an anniversary season in terms of, we're now 5 years into the work on the charter, essentially. And so if I went back the other day, there's a long email chain I had from Rocky that sort of looked at the history of the charter and where it started with this sort of board resolution to study the fact that we wanted to do something, and how would we move into that, and what would that look like. And with the first version of the charter, now I look at it and some of the language feels like, gosh, we were in like pre-K.
Ay,
Equity and access pre-K division.
Yeah, no, we really thought we had done something.
In the moment, good. First steps.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like you were talking about, you're a toddler, it's your first anniversary. And we were learning to say dada mama. And now we're probably like a little bit of a punky teen. And kind of think that we know what we're doing and still won't be there yet for a while, but have kind of an odd sense of self about it. So I'm happy that we're pushing forward. And it feels like, each week we're finding another place that needs that light, We're finding another process, another system, another thought pattern that we just need to sort of shake a little bit. And sometimes you shake it and you go, that one's okay. And then other times you shake and you go, wow. So we need to back up like 4 or 5 steps and really take some of this apart. And at the same time, understand we have a season and obligations and shows that have to open. And so what can we reasonably accomplish as we continue this journey? And it's stepwise, it's not leaps forward as quickly as I think many of us would like, because it takes time to shake through all those things. So yeah,
there's a whole lot of shaking going on at the company, I would say, in all kinds of areas. And I'd love to direct our attention a little bit to the art that we are making. Could you say a couple of words about what sorts of stories it is that are important for us to be telling right now and also in the future, and maybe why you see it that way?
Yeah, I think we talked some time ago when we first began our journey into discovery around anti-racism and anti-oppression, about and I've heard you say it on the score before, I think, but the idea of receiving and believing. And sometimes receiving is the tricky bit, and sometimes believing is the tricky bit. And it doesn't always happen in the same pattern, depending on what information you are receiving and what patterns of behavior and belief new information challenges to you and how you are emotionally tied to that work. But in general, I have found in each case that on the other side of the initial challenge, I've learned something. So for me, it's about figuring out, as we are making decisions, who's not in the room, whose stories have we not yet heard. We have plenty of beautiful work by a small homogenous group of folks that helped create this art form, but we haven't really pushed past that in a global way. And so I think part of that is shaking out what's next. How do we expand the team of creators and who we think of as creators of opera? Yeah, I mean, somebody asked the other day, what are the limits, or do you think there should be a limit on, I think it was a reporter with Opera America was asking, what are the limitations on who you want to bring in? And I was like, I think that's the wrong question. I think we need to be like out there trying to figure out who wants to be part of it and how that could work. And then in some cases it might, and in some cases it might not. But I don't think we should have limitations on who should be making the art. I think then it's just about finding a navigable path. We had a residency with Akram Khan in November, and one of the things that he kept talking about was, I want to create something that honors the vocal training that artists who have committed themselves to this craft have studied. And if I can make something that doesn't need them, then I won't feel like I have done enough with my art to meet that craft in the moment. And I thought that was really interesting. And because I didn't ask him to do that. That wasn't part of the deal, as it were. We just said, come and play with us and figure out what you want to do. So I think it's about pushing past what we think our limitations might be, and then figuring out, is there a navigable path? And do we have the resources? Because sometimes we don't have either the physical or the human resources or the financial resources to accomplish every single project that we might find. But the discovery piece is what I think I'm most curious about. And that's really, if there's one thing I can say about the Twin Cities and the arts community, there is an instinct towards creative curiosity. It's not always fulfilled in the way that we hope it might be, but the interest in figuring out what else is there is pretty strong in our community.
Well, speaking of our community, I mean, one thing that you and I have been working on this for a very long time, it seems like. And, when all of this first started, when you first came to Minnesota Opera, this was, access and EDI and anti-racism, perhaps all of that together, wasn't the focus. But it was certainly something that you came in and you were interested in shaking things up and changing things and changing the way that we do things. And so I'm curious as to sort of just, why that's been so important to you over the course of your career, and whether, the events of the past 2 years, especially here in this community, with COVID, with George Floyd's murder, with all the subsequent events that have happened, has that changed anything for you? Has that, changed your outlook, changed sort of the approach?
I was a singer in this art form, and so it was interesting to me to be a purveyor of storytelling through music, and literally be using a voice. I wouldn't call it necessarily my voice, but using the voice I had in service of this craft, and having studied a particular style of ability that allows a human to make noise that carries over a significant number of instrumentalists, right? Because that is the study for us. And if you've ever done anything with yodeling, this is a side topic, but like yodeling.
I have not. No. I mean, well, impersonating the Ricola commercials, but other than that.
There you go. But that style of singing emphasizes the break points when you have natural breaks in your vocal range. Opera tries to disguise it and make it look like you have this one voice, and you can't tell when you're in your head voice or your chest voice, and which is why when people use it super effectively, it's sort of surprising and awesome in a theater. But I went, as a singer, I went through and I had a lot of really cool experiences. And very rarely did I feel like I was using me, like me as a person, in the product. And the further I got into the pattern and the more conversations I had with my friends who were artists from all over the world, I realized that that's more common. I was not alone in having that experience. And it didn't mean that there weren't exceptions, which is what kept me in it as long as I was. But if someone like me, who was the owner of a lot of privilege based on who I was born to and where I was born and what my melanin looks like, if those things landed on me and I felt like I wouldn't say voiceless, but I was not in command of my voice the way that I would have liked to have been. If that was my feeling, considering the layers of privilege that I own, what must that feel like for those that don't have those layers of privilege? I have no comprehension because that's not my lived experience, but I can't imagine what that would be like, but I can't imagine it's favorable. so I think the process for me was when I get very specific and I think about my friends who are non-white or women or genderqueer people working in an industry that I felt othered in for a long time. My whole goal was to try and make an environment where everyone feels healthier than the environments I experienced. So that's kind of been the driving force behind my interest in the work. And I think our language changes and our understanding of what language means changes. But the goal is that those people sharing that space, I said something about this opening night of Anonymous Lover, but especially during the pandemic, to ask creative spirits to put aside all of their emotions and mental, trappings of the pandemic and their worry and their uncertainty and fear and anger and frustration of that we're having to deal with this still, to put that aside and say, now we want you to give of your creative spirit and allow your talent to lift our community, so that they might find some joy and shared connection. That takes a really special group of people to be willing to give. Because I know there are moments in my day, and I was not on stage pouring my heart out in Anonymous Lover, but I understand that they have found it, but I don't know how they found the space to give that gift in that moment. And regardless of the fact that we pay them, that is not why they do it. So yeah, I think all of those things combined, how do we celebrate those people that can make that gift and make that selfishly, in order for us as a community to have a moment of beauty and distraction and hopefulness.
That's beautiful. How we support people who, yeah, can bring us this gift. And it's bringing me to a question about just the artist that we choose to bring that gift, because that has changed in really noticeable ways too. I mean, soon people will hear in our interview with Nina, her talking about what it's like to be an Asian singer and, only have certain roles, and, that just about talking about how just about all your roles are specifically cast or specifically written as an Asian person, but also talk about how that doesn't necessarily occur at Minnesota Opera, and how we've tried to, get away from some of that. So I wonder if you could talk about what that transformation has been like, and what has it taken, what how are conversations different, maybe within the artistic team.
Yeah, I would say that, and I don't want to speak for everyone that works on the team, but I can say from my perspective, a lot of my own learning and thought process has been the happy result of accidental lessons. Before I came to Minnesota, I was in Arizona, and we invited an artist that I knew well, who's also been here in Minnesota, Karen Slack. We asked her to sing the role of Alice Ford in Falstaff, which is a Verdi comedy based on Shakespeare. And I remember that she was phenomenal in the role, but about halfway through the rehearsal process, she was sitting with me in the theater just in between rehearsals. And she said, "Why did you cast me in this role?" And I said, why wouldn't I have cast you in this role? And she said, well, the list of people who are Black who've sung Alice Ford is not long. And it's not something I ever thought that I would be offered. And so I've just been thinking a little bit about why you did this. And I said, well, I thought about what the vocal demands of the writing are, because it's challenging. It is as difficult as some of his very serious operas. And then I knew that I needed someone who was old enough to have a perspective on the world that we live in, and someone who was naturally funny. Because if you're a serious singer performing in a Shakespeare Verdi comedy, that is not going to be fun for anyone else watching. And Karen is accomplished, but I don't think she takes herself that seriously when it comes to a project like this. And she was willing to have fun and willing to be ridiculous, which made it so enjoyable for everyone that got to see her. So, what I learned from that is that one instance of me having a personal relationship with an artist like her meant that there were others that were having that experience to me. That's always what happens in my head when I have those conversations is, oh, here's someone who's actually said this thing out loud. What can I learn about that and apply it every time I'm thinking about casting or every time I'm thinking about roles? And then in recent years, as we've started to really look at the two sides of who's creating, who is or has created opera that we put on our programming, and given the fact that we now have the option of some new work, which is pretty much in its infancy in terms of what the sound of American opera will eventually be. We're going to have to zoom like 200, 300, 4 years in advance to figure out what the future thinks American opera is, because it's just so young still. And then we also have a lot of inherited repertoire written by mostly old white men. They weren't old at the time, but now white men with a certain level of privilege in society, and how they viewed things that society thought were either exotic or different. And sometimes they're writing about their own experience, and sometimes they're writing, sometimes they hid it by, like in Marriage of Figaro was written about where the composer was at the moment, but he had to set it somewhere else in order for it not to be censored. So he said, like, oh, it's in Spain. Like, no, that opera is not about Spain. It's anyway, you get the point. But now, how do we choose, after having decades and centuries of mostly white male interpreters of those inherited works? Some of them are going to be things that we want to revisit, but can we find a different way to illuminate that story? Is there a different director, a gender, a race, a cultural signal that a new director or a new conductor could find in order to connect us with this story in a different way? Some of that was, I guess it's been like 10 or 12 years. There was a high school group that Opera America asked to watch a bunch of different operas, and operas that were cast deliberately with many people of different hues in their skin, regardless of whether they were written 300 through 400 years ago or whether they were written a year ago. All of the high school kids thought that those were cool and modern because it's what their schools look like. It's what their lives look like. And they thought that was current. They could watch the same opera, Mozart, Verdi, Puccini, pick your Donizetti, cast with only white singers, and they view that as something of the past. So, all kinds of complications as we're looking at this, what I call 3D Sudoku, is what are the stories you're telling? How are you balancing the perspectives of creators with what you can afford to do and what you need to do to keep the company moving forward as you are making change? And then who's illuminating not only the creative control of that production, but how are they incorporating the other artists? What are the tools in terms of the artists you are casting that you can provide so that those creative teams can paint in a different way? it's a lot and it's
It is.
fun, but
Mhm.
it does take much more concerted thought. I will say it's much more rewarding.
Mm.
I mean, even though it takes more time and more energy, and it's, you're being that thorough and that detail oriented takes more time, but it is much more rewarding on the other side, um, to see what's possible. And it doesn't always work out the way that you intend, and sometimes it doesn't work out well, and sometimes it is better than anything you could have ever imagined, which is always a joy. Um, but it is different, and the sense of fulfillment is stronger, I find.
Mm.
And what of all that do you feel is perhaps the biggest challenge? Because I look at, sort of the industry as a whole. And, we sort of have this reputation perhaps as sort of being, out in front, as you mentioned earlier. What do you think people are, other companies or even our company, are sort of interpreting as the biggest challenge, and sort of what is the opportunity there for growth?
There are many challenges, Rocky, trying
Oh, tell me about it. That is why you pay me, right? To point all that out.
pick your favorite challenge. I'm gonna say that what what I believe we require of our team, and that's board and staff and artists and everything else, is a depth of curiosity and a generosity of spirit. So allowing for the fact that we are, just because we're ahead doesn't mean that we know what we're doing. It doesn't mean that we have every answer knocked out. It means that we're willing to be in the space. And I think the biggest challenge is that we have so many community members, family members with this opera group that come in and out. They dip in and out of our work. We work in that building. I mean, we work in this space now, but we work on our jobs 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, whatever that's required. But there are people who dip in for a show, or there are people who come in to help with an ad campaign, or there are people who come in to fix the toilets on the basement floor of the Opera Center. And like, those people are only with us for a moment while we are holding this very complex space open. And so the challenge, I think, is how do we rejuvenate our energy and our willingness to be generous of spirit in all of those instances and with all of those people. Because it's just it's a different exercise than coming to work and knowing exactly what you have to do, whether you have an assignment that could be considered rote, or whether you have a creative assignment, or whether you have a particular skill set that you know exactly how to fix that plumbing. And all with everything else going on in your life, all you want to do is come in and fix the plumbing and go home. And that's okay. But you're now in a space where we're trying to figure some stuff out. And we're going to ask that if you're coming in, you're willing to be in that space with us. And I think that's hard, because it's just disruption, and we're not, as a species, really great with constant change.
It's so true. It's so funny. Like, literally like an hour ago, I was having a very similar conversation with my therapist. I feel like I've been saying that a lot lately. But like, just how different our work has become, where it used to just be like, okay, so you asked me to make a product, here's the product, give me money and praise, thank you. And now it's so different,
Yeah.
Mhm.
My
Thank you.
therapist is tomorrow. I do it midweek because I need it halfway through the week to make it through the rest of the week.
I like early in the
recommend.
week. I need to start my week off with a with a gentle push in the right direction.
Highly recommend.
Well, I also don't want to give any of the other shows on the 60th season. I know we kind of got a little bit sidetracked, any short shrift, but Ronaldo's at Luminary, and then Daughter of the Regiment, and then Song Poet, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so exciting. And then what comes after that?
Don Giovanni.
Don Giovanni, yes, of course.
Which I think has been fired from a cannon on this very program.
Was it? Was it?
Oh no, I kept Don Giovanni. I know I did. I kept Don Giovanni.
It at least got fired by a member of the squad. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many, and I'm not going to go back and listen. Nobody's going to get a call on the carpet. It's it's fun to get to go through some of this. And I had a conversation with someone who heard one of those episodes, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we're never going to do blah 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 again." I can't remember the opera that they
As
said.
if we have that much power. If I
but they said, well, the score, that's the Minnesota Opera podcast. So if they say it, that's what we have to do. And I was like, the Minnesota Opera score podcast is like a new part of the conversation. And it doesn't mean that all the other conversations stop. It means that for a long time, you were only hearing a portion of what we talked about, and now we're just willing to have the conversation. And there are probably things that, I mean, I have shows that I have no interest in producing, and I have the level of experience and background that if I don't want to do a show, chances are we're not going to do that show.
Fair enough.
But I've also been proven wrong. I've had my mind changed by people and said, we should examine this. Chief among them, the baby opera that we did a couple years ago, which I never thought was going to be a thing, and I thought they were kidding when they presented it. And it was amazing. So anyway, all that to say, I'm excited for all of those shows for different reasons. I think in our history, we had a period that we were known as the Bel Canto Opera Company, and the technique that was required to sing that. No one, I hope, affiliated us with the Bel Canto Company for the beautiful, deep stories that some of the Bel Canto repertoire represents. That doesn't exist. They're all sort of silly because what people were trying to do is show the flexibility of the human voice. So, but of all of the pieces that they've done, some of which have been tremendous, they've never done Daughter of the Regiment here. And it's a show that is fun. And I think one of our guiding tenets for this coming season is that we wanted shows that were fun and magical and lifted you out of the doldrums of what was ever happening in your everyday life for just a moment of respite. And so for that reason, I'm excited about Daughter of the Regiment and the team that will be putting that together. And then, yeah, Song Poet, I have to say, my only reservation about Song Poet has been that there are certain stories that do not need music to be powerful. Mm-hmm. And Kalia's story is one of those that doesn't need music. But then I think the question becomes, what do you get to add? Mm-hmm. What can music bring that throws a different kind of seasoning or a different kind of connective tissue for people of different ages to interact with the story in a different way? And just the willingness that Jocelyn had in talking with Kalia and B and wanting to use as much of that and inflect that into her compositional art, I have found inspirational. So I am excited to get to do Song Poet and in a different way than we originally conceived it, because we're doing everything these days slightly different than we originally conceived anything. So that just feels like a natural part of that creative process's journey. and then to end up with a show like Don Giovanni that I think, you know, our traditional audience may have certain expectations around, and many of those expectations will be met. We're not going to set Don Giovanni on Mars. It's going to be a fairly recognizable period sort of exploration, but the difference is the entire creative team, conductor, director, and every designer are women. And sometimes, you know, I mean, I don't know that we've ever had a fully creative team be all women before here. I've had that in the past, but it shouldn't be surprising. It shouldn't be out of the ordinary, and yet kind of is. And certainly with this piece, and I was fascinated by what Katura, who is the director for the Don Giovanni, when she approached this piece, she said, you know, I always look when I'm starting to figure out a way through an opera, who's left at the end. And in this case, it's the three women who have interactions with Giovanni, who are left at the end. He gets dragged off to Hades, but the three women are still on stage, and so their story continues. And in her estimation, she was like, I'm interested as a director in understanding that the story we are telling is the Don Giovanni chapter of the story of these three women's lives that then goes forward after that. So how does this give them a catapult to whatever is next in their individual journeys? And I never heard a director say that. That's what excites me, is when somebody can come in the door and do something that is unexpected and takes us on a bit of a different journey with characters that we think we knew. So anyway, that's that.
Well, I mean, I'm sold. I'm in. But no, seriously, I mean, Ryan, you know, I think I can speak for all of us when I just say I'm just thankful that I get to work for a company that, you know, values me and my gay Black body and people who look like me, and is really committed to this vision of a more inclusive and accessible future for opera. And so thankful to have you here and your vision. So thank you so much for being on the show, for sharing all of that with us. And everybody go to mnopera.org, check out the new season, subscribe, buy some tickets. Well, still single tickets aren't on sale yet, but subscribe, do all that stuff. They will be this summer. And I'm sure we will have somebody on to talk about that then. But Ryan, thank you so much for being here. And I hope this isn't the last time.
Me too, but happy anniversary.
Oh, thank you. We'll have to have you on for Fire the Cannon sometime. We'll get in trouble.
Don't tell anybody I'm there. Just leave me in the corner until after the calls. We have to go to our guest judge now.
One of those voice disguisers. Guess who this is?
Something over my eyes, or like the silhouette, you know, in the background. That'll be funny.
That'll be fun. Well, can't wait. And thank you again so much. And everybody stay tuned for Nina Yoshida Nelsen, singer and co-founder of the Asian Opera Alliance, coming up after the break. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, we are back, and we are joined by a very, very special guest, incredible mezzo-soprano, Nina Yoshida Nelsen. Welcome to the show, Nina.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. So for those of you who don't know, Nina is a performer who has been hailed as a powerhouse, achingly poignant. Her performances have been called heartfelt, gripping, and for the past few decades, she has been performing in opera houses just around the country, too many to name. We'll be here all day, but Atlanta, Chicago, Sarasota. Notably, she made her debut at Chicago Lyric as Mama in Jack Perla's An American Dream in 2019. And this season, she will be singing at Boston Lyric Opera, Bard Opera, Opera Santa Barbara, Chicago Opera Theater. Did I say Boston Lyric? Boston Lyric again. Kentucky Opera and the Rhode Island Philharmonic. And one crazy stat that I saw when I was reading your bio is that you have been in 150 performances playing Suzuki in Madama Butterfly. That is wild.
That's a lot. Sure.
But one of the reasons why we are so excited to have Nina here today is that she is one of the co-founders of the Asian Opera Alliance, and she is a proud advocate for Asians in the opera community. So you know we are going to get into that because that is our jam. But Nina, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's just dive in with a question about the Alliance. If you could talk to us, tell everybody out there a little bit about the Asian Opera Alliance, what it is, how it started, and what the aim of the Alliance is.
Yeah, so back in the spring when we all experienced those horrific crimes, the shootings in Atlanta, we saw our Asian community start to really come together and speak out about hate and racism. And a lot of opera companies especially started making social media posts about how they support their Asian artists and whatnot. And I happened to be tagged in one of those posts with a certain company that I've worked at several times. And I wrote to my friend who also works for this company and I said, take a look at this post. This is really great that we are being acknowledged and supported, but look at everybody who's been tagged in this post. Almost, if not everybody in the post were Asians who had been typecast into Asian specific roles. And I said, I think the next step for opera when it comes to Asians is to stop pigeonholing us and typecasting us. And my friend, who's not a singer but works on the PR community engagement side, asked me, in a typical season, how many non-Asian specific roles do I play and compared to the Asian roles? And I went back and I myself knew that I had been typecast into roles, but I had no idea how much I'd been typecast. And I started counting. And like you said, I've done over 150 shows of Madame Butterfly. I've done, I think, 7 world premieres of Asian identifying operas and multiple iterations of those. And in 10 years, I had done 3 non-Asian roles.
Wow.
And I'm only half Japanese. So I was just kind of like, I was shocked myself. And so I talked with my friend and I said, if I didn't even realize what was happening, how is anyone else supposed to realize? And how are we supposed to change this? So the 2 of us got together. And then I called another friend of mine who he himself, at the same time, there were a lot of like benefit concerts and whatnot. And he said to me, oh, Nina, I don't understand why no one's calling me and asking me to participate in these concerts. And I said to him, no one knows you're Asian because he's half Asian and he's tall, dark, and handsome, very ambiguous, ethnically. And I said, no one knows you're Asian. And he started thinking about this and realized that over the years, he had stayed as far away as possible from claiming the fact that he was born in Korea and that he's half Korean, specifically because he had never seen anybody in the opera industry really succeed as an Asian. And so the 3 of us got together and we decided it was time to start advocating. And so we started having meetings and talking about how we wanted to advocate and what was important, and started reaching out to other Asians that we knew in the opera world. And together we came up with a quote unquote call to action that we sent to all the general directors of opera companies in the United States, advocating for Asians in the opera industry, both on stage as far as, you know, in roles of all sizes and shapes, and also to stop pigeonholing us into Asian specific roles. We also wanted to advocate for, you know, more Asian representation off stage, in the boardroom, you know, in the administration. And so that that letter went out July 22nd of this summer, and we've been just kind of plugging away ever since.
You hinted at this a bit when talking about especially the typecasting, that those stats are just mind-blowing.
I mean,
to me.
wild.
Like we know like it's a thing, of course, but just to have it in numbers like that, like is really wild. But I'm wondering, what do you think classical music organizations or opera companies can do besides stop typecasting to support? What else can they do to support the careers of Asian artists in a more robust way?
Well, I think, you know, another thing that I realized as I was looking around is I'm kind of one of the oldest, and I don't think I'm very old, Asian American opera singers out there. And so we've got a lot of young singers that are coming up, a lot. And one thing we need to do is we need to cultivate this young talent. We need to make sure that we're seeing you know, representation in young artist programs. There already is a lot in conservatories, but somewhere between conservatories and main stage, we lose a ton of Asian artists. So it's cultivating that in-between stage that really needs to happen. Also, I firmly believe, besides just stopping typecasting and pigeonholing, it takes being mindful about casting. It takes making sure that for a while we're really mindful until it becomes normal to see people of all shapes, sizes, colors on stage that reflect the way our world currently looks. Right now, we're not quite seeing that yet on the opera stage.
Yeah, for sure, right? And you know, Paige and Rocky and I have as our professional functions the responsibility to think through these kinds of things all the time. And you personally and others at the Alliance were really, really helpful in the conversations we had a few months ago, and helping us to really push ourselves in terms of some of the questions we were asking. And I feel like, you know, opera is really behind the curve with regards to progressive issues, right? Not to say that our cousins in the theater or the dance world have everything figured out. They clearly do not. But I'm curious if you have a perspective on why it is that maybe this has been such a challenging issue for us in opera, and maybe also if you could say a little bit about what activism might need to look like if we're going to combat that.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons it can be so difficult is because opera, you know, has been alive for centuries, and we've been doing productions for so long, right? And oftentimes they're traditional productions, and you know, you see things like Hamilton, which are really, you know, changing the way we imagine things.
Yeah.
Had been or whatever, right? And reimagining. And opera is just taking a longer time to get past those traditions and into what our world looks like and who we are now. And I think it will be doing things like enough times where you have an Asian Romeo and a Hispanic Juliet on stage in a traditional production, which is not what I grew up with, and may be uncomfortable to some people for a little bit of time. Until then, it becomes comfortable and normal. But it's taking things that might be a little uncomfortable to some people and normalizing it. And I think that that's one thing that really needs to happen. It doesn't mean that we need to take all of our productions and change them and modernize them. There are ways to do that as well, and I think that would help. But even in traditional productions, I think it can happen. It just may make some people, some patrons, some, you know, season ticket holders uncomfortable, but sooner or later it becomes comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm curious about, when it comes to, you know, younger singers who are coming up, what are some of the things that, you know, what are some advice that you would give to performers right now, who are in the industry and are experiencing some of this glacial movement towards pride?
Advice that I love to give to younger singers is that it's important to speak our truths and to speak up. I think for so long, I myself have been so worried about talking about my story and what the repercussions might be on my career if I do speak out about, I mean, I'm so thankful for Suzuki. She has provided many meals for my family and has provided me with experiences to last a lifetime and joy and relationships. And I mean, she's been a beautiful part of my life. However, it's really scary to come out there and say, look, this is what my career has been. And with what the opera companies are doing to my career, that is racist. That is an actual racist thing to be hiring me only for Suzuki and nothing else.
Amen.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for naming that. Thank you.
It's scary. It's really scary. And like, even now, as I say it, I have chills because I'm in, you know, the height of my career. But I've also learned how important it is to speak out because for example, the first time I spoke out about it on social media after I had kind of started helping form the Asian Opera Alliance, I kind of told the same story that I told you guys. And within a week, I had 3 offers for non-Asian roles. That already in one season doubles what I've done in the past 10 years. And then on top of that, I had 2 more offers for non-Asian roles. So this season, I'm doing 5 non-Asian roles and 2 Asian roles. And that's progress. And it comes from speaking out and from creating awareness. That being said, next season, I'm scheduled only to do Asian roles so far. So we're putting a Band-Aid on it. We're not making complete change yet.
That's kind of status quo that you've spoken of. That's been, you know, the thing for years and years, and you know, seen that hope with having more non-Asian roles than you did once. I wonder, like in the last, oh gosh, I guess it's been like a year and a half now that things have been pretty tumultuous with multiple crises, you know, the pandemic, with racial uprisings, with the horrible tragedy in Atlanta. Like, what have things been like for Asian artists right now? And how do you think like the past couple years specifically have created unique opportunities or challenges?
Yeah, great question. I am, so I had 2 Madame Butterflies that were canceled this season, specifically because of the, you know, the worry about potential hypersexualization of a Japanese woman on stage with Madame Butterfly and what that might create. And so at first I was really, really sad because, you know, these companies were saying, we're trying to protect Asians and Asian women, and we're trying by not producing this show right now. But when I looked at it, it seemed like what was happening was erasure. Like, and being afraid of, you know, cancel culture and what might happen if they do something. And I think it's really important that we do tell these stories, but with these stories comes education, right? And having these difficult conversations. We can't just erase it and pretend like it never happened. We have to engage in the difficult conversations in order to create change. So I was really happy when Boston Lyric Opera decided to take their Butterfly and turn it into a project they're calling the Butterfly Process, where they are hosting 7 webinars on Madame Butterfly with discussions on anything from Orientalism to, Puccini, to having DEI conversations and what it looks like to be an Asian artist pigeonholed into everything that goes around with Madame Butterfly. And then they're taking that and turning that into an evergreen project, which will then live online for opera companies to reference forever and ever, with talks about like traditional Japanese movement and costumes and what yellow face looks like and everything else that goes along with Madame Butterfly, so that in future productions, we will be able to produce a more socially responsible butterfly. So projects like that have popped up, which are exciting. And they're producing a concert called Uplifting Asian Voices. And we're really working to create some type of impact. And I think this is really important. So things like that have been really exciting. But, I think we all know change takes time. And a lot of it is just like chipping away one block at a time, right? In order to create this change, this lasting change.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really heartening to hear. On this podcast a couple of months ago, maybe 6-7 months ago, we actually were having a debate about whether or not it was even possible to produce a responsible butterfly at this point and sort of what it would take. So we are watching this process very, very intently. We were, there's a production of Tremonisha with Volcano Theatre Company in Toronto, where they are, taking a look at the libretto, the orchestrations. It's directed by a woman of color, and they're just sort of looking at everything again from a different lens. And I think that that's probably the way that we have to examine a lot of pieces, right? Like, what does it mean to sort of put in the hands of the person about whom the story is being told, right? That power to tell the story. So I find that very, very compelling personally. But maybe we could pivot and put the story in your hands and hear you talk a little bit about what you have coming up, what work you are excited about, either that you are doing or that you're seeing in the field now.
Well, so right now I'm actually performing a role as a queen, and
okay, queen.
And let me tell you, the pivot from being a secondary character to a leading lady is very strange for me. I've played secondary characters for 10 years plus now, and it's this real mindset change. But last night we had our first orchestra dress, and I got a text from my cover today that it is, I'm going to read it to you because it literally, I think, changed the way that I'm thinking about all this work that I'm doing. And it just touched my heart so much. And she said, and she names a person, had her family with her in the audience tonight. And the daughter kept asking, "Mommy, when is the queen coming out again? Where is she? She loved you and your costumes." And it made me so happy thinking that a child who is not Asian is seeing this beautiful Asian woman on stage playing the role of queen.
Oh.
Right? I mean, that just, it really kind of made me sit back and think how important what we're doing is, and that it's going to change generations to come. So, I think most exciting for me is doing this work that I never knew I was meant to do. And it kind of just fell in my lap. And I've had to learn a lot about activism and about advocating. I've had some amazing people who have reached out to me and helped me. And but sitting down with, Minnesota Opera, you were the first company to reach out to the Asian Opera Alliance and ask to have a meeting to discuss what we're trying to do. But since then, we've met with a lot of companies, and I think people are really, really trying to make change. And I think that's super exciting. Working with Boston Lyric Opera and what they're doing is really exciting. And just finding ways to tell these stories that are so important that we're telling, and then to make sure that this next generation of singers has it better than we had it, I think is all very exciting to me.
Well, that brings a little light bulb sort of popped into my my head, because I'm just so curious, sending that letter out to every general director of an opera company, in the US, that's such a huge thing, such a huge, bold move. And, it's so wonderful to hear about, the changes, the positive changes that have already taken place. But have you met with any sort of resistance to any of your work, and what does that look like?
We definitely have, and I'm sure there will be more to come. We've actually, to tell you the truth, we sent out somewhere around 170 letters, and we had, I think, 17 companies come back to us to even acknowledge acknowledge the fact that we had sent out this. It was called a call for change, and 17, so 10%. So within that, we are looking at what our next steps need to be in order to make sure that we're really being heard. But we did have one company where a general director was asking, why are we always focusing on the negative? Why can't we focus on the positive?
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry.
We've had general directors talk about Asian representation in Asia or even in Europe, and how much representation there is in Asia and Europe. And one thing, we are advocating for, when we were trying to figure out, this term Asian is so vast, right? And we have South Asian, East Asian, like it's not, you can't just say Asian and be done. You've got Asians from Asia, Asian Americans. And when we were forming the Asian Opera Alliance, we were trying to figure out the best way to advocate for as many people as possible without it being super overwhelming. So what we decided was we were going to advocate for Asians in the United States working in US opera houses. And so that's what we focus on, specifically US opera houses. And so when, general directors come back and say, well, I've been to, go see the opera in China and there's lots of representation, that doesn't help very many of us that are here working in the United States. So there has been some pushback, and one of the biggest things that we see is companies that say, okay, well, we will hire Asian singers singing Butterfly, Turandot, Pearl Fishers, and we come back and we say, that's great, but you also need to be hiring them to sing another role, either in a season before, a season after, or the same season. You can't just be pigeonholing them into, representation matters, right? We want to see faces on the stage, but we need to see them in other roles as well. So that's the biggest pushback we get is, okay, well, we'll do Butterfly, and it's going to be with Asians, but we may not hire them for other roles. So,
given the lack of diversity in the positions, the administrative positions that are actually making the decisions, like you can almost follow the like trail of illogic, right? And I think that these things are so tied together, right? And I think that we also, just as an industry, need to make much more of a coordinated push around thinking about who is in these decision-making seats, right? And what sort of experiences they have access to, because the connection between the two is undeniable.
Absolutely. It's the gatekeepers, right? And it kind of stops with these gatekeepers, and it's until we get more diversity across the board, until then, change won't really happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, turning it back, I guess, kind of to your journey, and what has inspired you, or rather, who? It's the shout out moment. Do you have any role models or mentors that you've come across in your career? Folks, especially, I think, mentors who are also Asian or of color, and like, what did you admire about them? How were they like for you?
Yeah, I think there are so few Asians in our community that we really stick close together, and it's a pretty powerful connection that we all have. I'm not someone who has always quote unquote identified as Asian. I would identify as Southern Californian, and a mom and a wife and whatever. But because I'm fourth generation Japanese American, there was not a lot of like Asian culture that was handed down to me. My grandparents were interned during World War II. And so at that point, it was kind of like, you don't act Japanese. There's no Japanese names that are handed down. It's like you're as American as possible, and you just do good work. You're a good student, and you're no longer Japanese. You're just American. And so for me, a lot of my first role models were people when I was first being cast into Butterfly, and like, what does this look like? What does it look like to be Asian? And so, a lot of my first butterflies were people who I really looked up to. Now, once the Asian Opera Alliance started, Phil Chan, who wrote the book Final Bow for Yellowface, and he's been changing the ballet world for the past 5 years, and specifically working with the Nutcracker and addressing the Chinese dance that's in the Nutcracker, and how can we change this to not be racist anymore. And so he reached out to me and said, look, I'm so happy to have the Asian Opera Alliance here, because I've been fielding a lot of these questions in the opera world too. And as much as I love opera, ballet is where I belong. And so he has been teaching me a lot about what it means to be an advocate for Asians, and what it means to speak up and to speak out, and to stand tall and strong and proud. And so he's, I'd say, my biggest mentor right now. Watching everything he's accomplishing is just incredible.
Well, so we're sitting here right now in the Twin Cities, which, everybody knows is sort of this global epicenter for this movement for racial justice. And, one of the ways that we all know that white supremacy flourishes is by taking all of the constituent groups of the people of the global majority, the Black folks, the Asian folks, the Latin folks, the Middle Eastern folks, the indigenous folks, and pitting us all against each other. And so I'm curious, in this particular moment, what do those other activist movements, Black Lives Matter, for instance, the Black Opera Alliance, for instance, what role have they played, or how have they inspired your activism as well?
I think one of the things that we at the Asian Opera Alliance were so inspired by was seeing the results of the Black Opera Alliance, and seeing the way they came together, and the way they were creating change in just a year, and really meaningfully stepping out there and saying some really hard stuff, but getting great results. And so I think that was one of our inspirations when we founded the Asian Opera Alliance, was looking at them and seeing that it is possible. And the first step is just talking about it, and bringing it to light. And then we can go from there. And so seeing that was really inspirational to us. But I agree. I think there's a lot of pitting different racial groups against each other. And there is yet to be a talk about what true diversity looks like. And I think that's coming. I think that there's it should be a rainbow, right? It should be, we should look up on that stage and see representation of everybody that we see in our world. And I think opera companies right now are still scared to make those changes, and still scared to just to meaningfully say, okay, for a while, I'm going to really purposefully cast in such a way. But, we have gotten several emails that say, well, look at our diversity. We're so diverse, yet we don't, from opera companies that say, look what we're doing compared to like 2 years ago. We have so much more diversity now, yet there's not a single Asian singer in their whole season.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the next step for some of these companies that are really trying to make change is the talk about what diversity actually is.
Yeah, that is a huge point, right? I feel like if you are looking at a production on stage and what you see does not actually look like what the world looks like, then there is a failure somewhere, right? And I think we have to start using these really stark terms to send the message that we are not happy with the pace and that it is not satisfactory, and simply saying this is better than how terrible it truly was 5 minutes ago is not really the answer, right?
Right.
And I will say that I know that we have other general directors and artistic directors who listen to this podcast. Hopefully they're fans of it and they're not listening in abject terror. But while you have their ear, and before we let you go, this has been a really extraordinary and provocative set of things that you've said. Are there any perspectives you want to leave those folks with?
Yeah, sure. Asian Opera Alliance hosted a Zoom meeting recently, and it was a place where we could talk about what it's like to be Asian in our opera industry. And there was a general director who sat in, one general director who did sit in on our Zoom meeting, and afterwards, several of us said, "Can you imagine what it would be like if every single general director from opera companies in the United States had sat in on that hour-and-a-half talk about what it's like to be an Asian artist in the United States?" I think one of the scariest things as an artist myself is the fact that since I don't have a job where I'm hired 9 to 5 and I am tenured or whatever, I'm always looking for my next job. And I'm at a place for a month and then I leave, and I'm at another place for a month and I leave. I may make a little bit of change in that time that I may like have some type of influence, but rarely do we have these relationships with general directors or people who are running these opera companies. Rarely do they come to us and ask our honest opinions of what's happening, and rarely do we feel safe enough to then give our opinions to them. So I think having an open mind, knowing that the Asian Opera Alliance, we're here as a resource for others. We want to work together. I think same with the Black Opera Alliance. I think, in general, we're all here because we love this art form and we want to see it thrive. But, it can't just thrive with a few people running everything. It really has to be a movement where we're all involved. And I think that's like, come to us, talk to us. We're here. We're excited to work together. I think it would be a great collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it would.
So speaking of resources and learning more about y'all and talking to y'all, if people want to get involved or learn more about the Asian Opera Alliance, where can they go?
You can find us on Instagram and on Facebook, Asian Opera Alliance. We have a website, asianoperaalliance.com. You can email us at asianaoperaalliance@gmail.com. But I think we're all an open book, and any of us are happy to get together and talk with companies.
And those links, of course, will be in the show notes, everybody. But if people want to learn more about you and where to come see you perform, hear your beautiful voice, where can people find out more about you, Nina?
My website, ninayoshidanelsen.com, is a great place to start. I'm also very active on both Instagram and Facebook, so you'll find a lot of pictures of my kids there, a few production pictures, and some puppy pictures probably too.
Nice. And we will have those in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for being here. We enjoyed this conversation so much. Like Lee said, it was so provocative but informative, and we just so admire the work that you all are doing. And we hope that we can do this again sometime.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really powerful. We're really appreciative.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you once again, Nina Yoshida Nelsen. Everyone go check out Asian Opera Alliance. Go check out Nina's page. Go see her when she's performing this spring. And we will be right back. All right, we are back. Oh my goodness. Want to thank Nina Yoshida Nelsen one more time. Also Ryan Taylor for being here. Yay. And I know we're running long, so we're gonna do a really quick a 3, a 2, a 1. I hit it.
Peanut butter jelly time. Peanut butter jelly time. It's peanut butter jelly time.
Oh, hey. That's like the sourdough remix.
One day I'll do a chopped and screwed version for you. Do a Dirty South remix.
Well, speaking of down south, my little bit of pure Black joy today, the first part acknowledges a close personal friend and head of mine, Miss Beyonce Giselle Knowles, for her first ever Oscar nomination.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
How did we not mention this before?
Child, there's been a lot happening in the world.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
But for those of you who didn't see the nominations or who are living under a rock, Beyonce was nominated for her song Be Alive, which was co-written by Dixon. It's from the movie King Richard, which is, of course, a biopic about the great Venus and Serena Williams and their family. I will just also want to point out really briefly that Anjanou Ellis, who plays their mom in the movie, was nominated for supporting actress. Anjanou Ellis has been one of my favorite actresses since I first saw her on stage as a college student. So I'm super excited to see her here too. If you don't know, shame on you, Google her and be blessed by her talent. So a big congratulations to both of those multi-talented ladies. Super excited. We'll be rooting for you and we'll be protesting if you don't win. So
there you go. And shout out to Will and Denzel as well.
Yeah, obviously.
Yes.
You know what? That makes me think real quick, y'all. When a real quick extra pure Black joy nugget, when Michaela oh gosh, I'm losing her name now. She's on Pose. She was the first Black trans
Rodriguez
woman to win. Yes.
MJ
Rodriguez.
Thank you, MJ Rodriguez. Yes.
Another favorite actress of mine. Absolutely. I loved you in Little Shop of Horrors. If you're listening, Michaela.
Yes, me too. Oh my gosh, you did that, girl. Oh my God. I was so happy for her because her character on Pose has just been like a character. Like when people look back on characters and shows they remember of their generation, like she's gonna be one. Blanca Evangelista, yes.
Absolutely. And on a show where there were so many extraordinary performances by actors and actresses of color, that is one that absolutely stood out. And if you don't know about Pose, shame on you and get on Google because
Like,
it's
what
a
you
damn
doing?
good show. Right. Where you been? What's the problem?
I mean, it's on Netflix, right? Is it
It's
still?
on Netflix. It's on Hulu. It's
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Mhm.
Widely available. Or you can just
Widely
come to my house and we'll watch it together. Like, whatever you want to do.
Well, I don't think we need any more pure Black joy as soon as you mention Beyonce. But shout out to all those folks. And thank you once again to our guests. As usual, please rate, review, subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your fine podcasts. 5-star reviews only.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3,
Solamente.
4, 5.
Okay. I'm not going to say it again. And subscribe and, tell all your friends about us. And please feel free to write in with any comments, thoughts, concerns, I guess. Whatever.
Could they be concerned about?
I don't know. Maybe that we're just too good and too fun. Too good looking. Too saucy.
That sounds about right.
Too much sauce on this podcast. All right, that's it. Bye.
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 We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.